Hello, this is the Property Podcast. I am Rob B, and with me is Rob D. And Rob, you know I've been excited about this episode.
Sometimes I wonder if you just started doing this podcast so we could do it for 3.5 years and get to this specific point. But go ahead, have your moment.
Thanks, Rob. It's episode 180.
There we go. How did that feel?
It's good. No joke, I've actually said to Rob weeks ago, I can't wait for this episode. You know what? I kind of feel like I've caved under pressure on the day. I could have done a better job. But there we go. I'm not going to re-record it again.
Well, next week we may not have a podcast because that was it. That was the high point. This is episode 180. And as well as that, we have got a topic. We are going to be talking about how to buy an HMO. Popular topic. Lots to know about it and hopefully lots of information to pass on. Also got a really nice resource if you are particularly lazy like me. And a news story that ties in very nicely to what we were talking about on last week's show about QE. But first, a couple of little news items, starting, Rob, with a new job at RMP.
There is. So last week, I teased you slightly to let you know about a role that's coming up at RMP. But let me reveal exactly what's going on. So there's many important roles at RMP, but one of them is the portfolio managers. And essentially, they're the people who work with the investors day in, day out. So they're the people who will speak to them when they contact RMP, help them establish clear, defined goals, meet them, work through their strategy, and then ultimately help them build a portfolio. So it's a really important role. And as I mentioned last week, the type of people that were attracted to that role previously when advertised through normal channels were just, can I say it? Not all, but a lot of slimy salespeople, and it's just not what RMP is about. Yes, it is a people person's job, and yes, you got to like people and talking to people, but you're not trying to manipulate them and make them do things and, you know, try and be a bit clever and quick. It's about building long-term relationships. So I came up with the bright idea, well, I don't know if it was me or somebody in the team, but I'm going to take credit for it, that the people we want are the people that probably listen to the podcast. So if you are tempted, you might not be looking for a role right now, or maybe you are, but either way, I'd love to hear from you, even if you're just slightly, you know, your interest is pricked by this. Go to rmpproperty.com/apply here. That's rmpproperty.com/apply here. Have a look, fill out a brief form. We know it's about this role because it's the only one we've got open right now. And I'd love to hear from you. We'll contact you either way if we move you on to the next stage of the process. Rob and I have talked about recruitment in a previous podcast, so you'll get an idea of the steps we take. But that's because we've got a fabulous team and really, really amazing people. And I think that's what makes it such a special place to work, is the people that work there. So we want to make sure that the next person to join us is a fabulous person also. So check it out. We'll link to it in the show notes as well. But the link again, if you want it, is rmpproperty.com/apply here.
Oh, well, there you go. We're offering jobs, also offering advice on how to get those jobs. If you go back to episode 176 on how to hire, there are some tips on there. So if you are interested in that role, you can sneak your way to the front of the queue by following some of the steps that we lay out there. And not only that, we're also offering you a night out because meetups are next week. The first Thursday of the month means Property Hub Meetup Nights, 30 meetups across the UK and beyond. They are all completely free. They are all, like the RMP job, free of slimy salespeople, just really good fun. We are going to be at meetups. We don't know which ones yet. We are going to decide over the next week or so, but you can get along to your nearest by just going to thepropertyhub.net/meetups. You'll see the full list. You can go, you can book your place. You need to book so they know how many people to expect, but it will not cost you a penny. And I think it'll be a very wise investment of a few hours of your time.
It certainly will. And you know what else would be a wise investment of your time? It's listening to last week's episode. If you missed it, you were put off by the title. Go back. It was really good, I promise you. It was on QE, quantitative easing. This week's news story really develops that a little bit further and really backs up what we're saying. And we love these news stories. So that's what we're bringing you this week.
Yeah, so this is a story from The Guardian. If you want a story talking about the evils of property, The Guardian is normally the place to go. But they've got a point, I think, this time. The headline is ONS data shows UK wealth wedded to property. And what it's saying is the UK's current net worth, apparently, is 8.8 trillion. It sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. It's 4 times what it was in 1995. Now, on the face of it, that sounds like it's a good news story. The country is 4 times richer. The problem is where you look at where that wealth actually is, and the answer, not surprisingly, is lots of it is in housing. Because housing has gone up so rapidly over the last couple of decades, there's all this wealth, in kind of inverted commas, that has been created, but isn't actually doing anything useful for anyone. So rising house prices is great if you're trying to remortgage and build a portfolio. It's great in terms of stimulating the economy because, in theory, if people feel richer and having a house that goes up in price makes them feel richer, they'll go out and spend to stimulate the economy. But it's not actually doing a great deal of good. The fact that the country's net worth is increasing is masking the fact that the debt is also increasing, both on the government level and a personal level. So it backs up what we were talking about last week, which is always good. And it also kind of backs up a point about what you measure, I suppose. It's like if you're only measuring net worth or GDP or one particular thing, you can often ignore what really matters. And it feels like sometimes that's what happens with stats like this. Like the government quite like putting out things that make it sound like everything's going great, but just because it's going great for some people doesn't mean it's going well for everyone.
No, it doesn't. So read this article, which you can find at this week's show notes, which are thepropertyhub.net/by HMO. That's thepropertyhub.net/by HMO. And thanks very much to Noah, who actually sent us this news story via Twitter. So thank you, Noah. And if you'd like to send Rob and I any news stories, no abuse, please. No one actually does that. Everyone's very nice. But if you'd like to send us news stories or anything else of interest, then you can do that through Twitter as well. Rob's at Rob Dix, and I'm at Rob Bence. Nice and easy.
Yeah, but don't expect a reply from me within a few months. I think tweet Rob if you actually want something on the show before episode 500. Anyway, moving swiftly on. Topic of the week this week is how to buy an HMO. HMOs are still a really popular topic. They've been in vogue for quite a while, especially actually rising house prices are a factor in this, because if you're paying more to acquire a house in the first place and rents tend to rise in line with wages, which is not very much in recent years, therefore your yield is decreasing. How do you increase that yield? Well, one way that people have turned to is HMOs, because you rent them out by the room. They make more money than you would if you're renting it out as a single let. Therefore, your yield is higher. That's why HMOs are attractive, and they can work very, very well. There are a lot of extra steps and extra things to think about compared to your average single let property purchase. And that's what we're going to be talking about this week. We're going to be running through some of the factors involved in buying an HMO. And we say how to buy an HMO because, yes, the management's really important. And there's all the normal stuff that you have to think about with property as well. But actually buying the right property and setting it up properly in the first place is absolutely critical to the success of the whole enterprise. So that's what we're going to talk about. And just like with any property, it all starts with working out where you're going to buy.
So, where are you going to buy? Well, before you do that, you need to know your market. HMOs are great, but there's different types. So, are you going to go down the student route? Are you going to market to professionals? Or are you going to go look for people who take government benefits? So, there are different routes, and of course, each will require different things and different locations. So, once you know which of those you're going to go forward with, then you need to pick your location accordingly. So, obvious stuff here, but we're starting at the beginning, so let's start with the basics. Students, they need to be near a uni. It sounds obvious, but having a student town and just being anywhere in that town or city isn't going to work. You need to be in the right student areas. Professionals absolutely need to be near transport links. And the benefits market is often close to town centres, and the reason why is because it's walkable. So a really simple way of making sure the area you're looking at is where supply and demand exists is spareroom.co.uk, which is a great resource because, yes, it's where people go to let rooms. A bit like Rightmove, but just for HMOs. So check that out. And also, councils will often supply a list of licensed HMOs as well, which you can use for the same purpose. Word of warning though, the location, don't push it. So you know a location area and then you go a little bit further and everything's cheaper, so you think your return's going to be higher. I've seen that happen before firsthand with investors I've met, and they can't fill the property. So they thought they were, hacking it by moving out slightly of that area and therefore getting the same rent but buying a cheaper property, so a better return. But they've not been able to fill the property, so they've actually done a lot worse. So just be careful.
Yeah, this is absolutely critical, this point. If you don't get this point right, there is no point going any further. You cannot compromise on location. 2 reasons for that. Firstly, like Rob says, if you can't keep it let, if you go to all the expense of buying the property, setting it up, converting it in the way that needs to be done to make it into an HMO, if you go to all that expense and then you can't keep it let, and you end up, as a result of having empty rooms, getting a yield which is the same or lower as you would have had with a single let, but with a lot more expense and a lot more hassle, that would be a disaster. Also, if demand falls or the supply of HMOs expands, then it stands to reason that it's the ones in the worst locations that will struggle to let first. So there have been some suggestions recently that we've kind of reached peak HMO because it is a bit of a trend. Supply has expanded greatly. And what that means is that the ones that are a little bit marginal, the ones where people have just pushed that extra road across, they're the ones that are going to struggle to let first. If you've got the absolute best HMO in the whole town, then, well, even if supply falls down to the point that only one is demanded, you'll be okay. But that's why, especially at the moment, you don't want to be pushing it. You cannot be compromising on location.
But you can't just go off and buy anywhere, because there's something called Article 4. So some councils have introduced this, and basically means that they've withdrawn the ability for you to change a single let property into a HMO without permission. So you need to apply for permission. But don't get your hopes up just yet, because it's very difficult to get permission. They've done it for a reason, to restrict supply. So there are concerns around particular areas with too many HMOs. So this is why they introduced Article 4. So an easy way to establish this is Google Article 4 with the name of the town or the local authority you're looking for, and it'll give you a map of the areas affected, if any. It's often, and you see this, and you can see why, areas with a big student population, because HMOs can literally change a local town or an area of a town in a few years overnight, and the whole community moves out. So Article 4 is a way of the local council protecting that area. You can only take over an existing area that has Article 4, but you'll pay more for it because, obviously, the supply of them has been restricted.
Yeah, if you own an HMO that's in an Article 4 area where it's just been put into place, the value of it will often get a bit of a bump because there's now a barrier to entry. But yeah, this is a really, really important step. Just one quick Google search could be the difference between being fine and an absolute disaster. I have known people to buy a property in an Article 4 area that they're planning to turn into an HMO. They found out that they couldn't, and then they're stuck with a property they wouldn't otherwise have wanted. Not something you want to do.
Ouch.
Ouch, indeed. So having got to the point of buying the property in, hopefully, exactly the right location, you found a bit of a winner, well then you've got to finance it. And to finance it, you're going to need a specialist mortgage of one type or another. So for HMOs, commercial lenders like Shawbrook and Aldermore are common choices for this type of investment. You can also look at your more typical buy-to-let lenders. They'll finance often some types of HMO, but they'll all have different restrictions. So, for example, some of them will have a maximum number of rooms that they'll allow, or they'll say, I've seen that the bedroom doors need to have a certain type of lock on them that isn't operated with a key or something like that. Or they'll say, yes, you can have multiple people sharing, but they all need to be on a single tenancy agreement. So if every lender is going to have their own angle on this, and this is one where a good broker is really helpful, because just like when you're getting a mortgage normally, you have to look at the lenders who are accessible to you based on your criteria, and then look at the rates that are available and pick the best one from that pool that remains. With HMOs, there's this extra factor. You have to look at the ones who will finance the type of HMO that you're setting up, then look at the ones of those who will accept your personal situation, and then go and look at the rates. So there's this extra step that will cut the pool even further. If you're getting an HMO as your first property, it can be especially tough because lenders like to see experience. So if you're becoming a first-time landlord and your first property is an HMO, it can be a real struggle to find a lender for that. And that kind of makes sense because it is more of a challenge to manage, and so they want to see some experience. So often you'll see people who want to do this, but they'll have to go off and buy another property first, or buy it with bridging and run it for 6 to 12 months to have experience in order to tick the box. But what all this means is you want to be taking advice, and you want to be doing it quite early in the process because you don't want to get to the point of finding that perfect property and then embarking on a massive struggle to find the right mortgage.
Now, there's a lot of confusion about HMOs and how are they valued by lenders, whether they're valued based on income or if it's on the bricks and mortar value. Now, because this is quite an in-depth subject, we've got a podcast for you to listen to. Rob had a guest on the Property Geek podcast, Simon Allen. He talked about the different types of lending, the things you need to be aware of. So go to the propertygeek.net/HMO-mortgages-podcast, or actually just make your life easier and go to the propertyhub.net/buy-HMO, and you'll find the link there. Also, you'll find out much, much more on HMO financing and some of the stuff we discussed already in the magazine that's coming out soon, but we'll talk about that at the end.
Okay, so that's the financing, which is a little bit more complicated with HMOs than it is with single lets. Another thing that you have to think about with HMOs is licensing. Actually, you're starting to need licenses in some areas for single lets as well, but the least said about that, the better. With HMOs, you often need a license, and you need to check whether you do. It's one of the world's more boring topics to talk about on a podcast, so we'll try and keep this brief. But basically, if you've got an HMO that's got 5 or more rooms across 3 or more floors, then anywhere in the country, it'll definitely need a license. Some councils, though, have extended this requirement to smaller HMOs, and they'll have different definitions about what's acceptable and when you need a license and what the conditions of holding that license are. So it'll often be things relating to fire escape route, safety issues, the information that's displayed, who the manager of the property is, all this kind of stuff, things that you'll need to put in place and be able to prove. They'll come around and inspect it and then grant you a license. The thing to do, again, is to return to your trusty friend Google or the search engine of your choice and just Google HMO regulations and the name of the local authority. It'll normally say on the website what the requirements are, or if not, it'll at least bring up the right department and you can call them. People who I've spoken to have said that councils are actually quite helpful on this point. It's not too difficult to speak to the right person and get a steer from them about what you need to do. But again, really, really important step because you need to know what the licensing requirements are, because if they require you to do certain things in terms of safety, then there are going to be costs associated with that, and those costs need to be accounted for. Speaking of which, there's been quite a lot of work here. Is it all going to be worth it at the end?
Well, let's quickly run through the running costs, and there's a few, so I'll be quick as I can. First of all, you got mortgage payments, more than likely to be higher than a single let because of the rate and the terms. Management fee, again, higher than a normal let, often 12 to 17% unless you do it yourself, but remember, your time isn't free, you are trading that in. Letting fee, sometimes this can be a bit extra as well. It can be anywhere from 100 to 250 for each time a room is let, again, unless you do it yourself. Bills per month, £20 per room per month is an estimate a lot of people use right now, but obviously you've got to change that if things move up or down accordingly, often up with utility bills. Extras, bills could be higher if you include things like Sky, which if you're going for the professional market or the student market, I think is a basic requirement now, and anything else fancy you introduce. Council tax, unless they're all students. Cleaning could be anywhere from sort of £20 to £40 a week, depending on how often you do it and the area you're in. Maintenance, put aside at least 5% of the rent, because you're going to have more wear and tear on this type of property. And voids, similar number, again, 5% of the rent. Whew, lots of costs, but if it was just all cost, nobody would do it. So, Rob, there's got to be some return here.
There is. And this is where it gets tricky, because ROI is a tricky number to pin down at the best of times, because you see people talking about it, and you see people talking about these fantastic ROIs that they get from HMOs, and you're never quite sure if they're factoring in all these costs. And you also don't know if they're putting a cost on their time. So, for example, if someone says, I'm getting a 25% ROI from this HMO, then, well, maybe they are, but they're self-managing and sinking hours and hours of their time every week into it. And if you had 15% of your rent going to a management fee, that would bring your ROI down. I look at HMOs every so often. I know Rob does as well. Every so often, you're tempted by the gross yield and take a look at it. On paper, whenever I've gone through and I've put in all the costs that we talked about earlier, including management costs, because it's not something I'd want to do myself, I've never managed to end up with an ROI higher than 16%. Whenever I do calculations, I base it on like a 75% loan to value at around 5%. And the highest I ever managed to get to is 16%. And that is obviously pretty good. Like if you had a single let that was achieving that with those kind of costs included, then you'd be doing very well indeed. So the ROI is higher, or can be higher, than a single let, but you also need to be realistic about what it can be. This would be a great discussion in the Property Hub if you run an HMO and you'd like to let us know what returns you are getting, because they are higher, but then you've got to be realistic. You're not going to get absolutely off the charts by the time you've built all these costs in. The thing about costs is there is only so much that you can do about them. Like however well you shop around for your letting agent or your utility supplier or whatever, however well you keep it occupied, there is only so much you can do to minimize costs. So if your costs are relatively constant and your rent is what it is, then, well, the only other way to increase your return is to decrease the cost of buying the property and setting it up in the first place. So the trick to getting a really great return is to buy cheap. No surprise there. Fit in as many bedrooms as you can without really packing them in and affecting quality. Because obviously, if you can reconfigure and fit in an extra bedroom, then that could be an extra, well, however much, hundreds of pounds a month that you wouldn't otherwise have had. And also set it up in such a way that allows you to maximize the rent and keep occupancy high. So if you just spend a little bit more on the refurb or the furnishings or whatever it is that allow you to maximize the rent, so you're just spending a little bit more at the start to get a little bit more every month for forever, that's definitely a good investment. So those are all the things to think about when you're buying at the right price, reconfiguring it in the right way, furnishing it and refurbing it in the right way. Hopefully that will allow you, even after all the costs, to get a return that makes it all worth your while.
So, as you can tell, there's a lot of moving parts to this, far more than a normal let. So research is even more important than usual. We've called this How to Buy a HMO because however well you manage it, there are two important things you can never change: where it is and how much you pay for it. And that's really what it comes down to. Getting the right management right is essential too. But the key to a great profit is buying in the right place at the right price and then it up to standard for a reasonable amount of money to maximise your returns. But be careful, it's a fine line. If you go too cheap, it's going to put people off. So it's a balance. There's lots and lots of moving parts. And this is why we're featuring, the next magazine we're doing is a HMO special. There's other stuff in there as well. It's not only on HMOs, but the main feature article is on HMOs. The main finance article is on HMOs. There's loads and loads in there, case studies. So if you are serious about HMOs, or you're already doing it, you want to improve, or it's something you've considered, or you've been distracted by, like Rob and I, I'm really looking forward to this magazine, even though I'll probably never get around to doing it because I'm always put off for one reason or another. I want to know more. It's one of those subjects that it's definitely in the top 3 subjects we get asked about all the time, HMOs. So a podcast is great, and I hope you've enjoyed this, but we're going to expand on it a lot more in the magazine. Many of you are subscribers already, we know, because we can see the numbers. But if you haven't subscribed yet, get along to thepropertyhub.net/magazine or this week's show notes, which is thepropertyhub.net/buy HMO, and we'll link to a subscription link there. It's only $5 a quarter, bargain, and that's delivered as well. So check it out.
Yes, please do. And hopefully you found this episode useful. You'll find lots of links to follow up in the show notes. If you have found it useful, consider leaving us a review. And Rob, some people have been doing that for sure.
They have. And I like this person because Joshua defended us. Because, Rob, back early in the year, we had our first negative review.
I was just getting over it and you had to bring it up again.
I'm sorry, Rob. I'm sorry. Over 300 plus 5-star reviews, and they're the ones we focus on. And the only reason I mention it is because Joshua had read that review and said this. By far the best podcast on iTunes. Great format, very upbeat and informative. Don't take notice of negative reviews, lads. 99.9% of people think you're class. You're doing the right thing, sharing information worth thousands for free to help everyday people get started in property investment. Taking great inspiration from this podcast, it feels so right to leave a smashing review. I'm only 21 and about to finish uni, and thanks to this podcast now, I'm using my savings to invest in buy-to-let. Boom. Thank you, Joshua. Great review. And thank you for your support. And thank you to the support from everyone, because we wouldn't do this many episodes and podcasts twice a week if we didn't love it. But the reason why we love it is because we know so many people get behind it and enjoy it and go to the meetups, and it just makes it so fun for us. So thank you so much.
Yeah, huge thank you. Love getting reviews like that. And to pay you back, let's have a resource of the week for the 180th time. I can't believe how many resources we've managed to dig out. And this is a simple one, but it's one that I've been using.
Pen and paper. Running out. Pens. Have you heard of pens, anyone?
Yeah. Now, this one is a simple one, but it's one that I've been enjoying recently. It's called mysms.com. What it is, it's something that allows you to send and receive texts on your laptop or on your tablet. And it's really simple. All it means is once you've set it up, as well as getting texts come in on your phone, they'll also come in on your laptop or your tablet. And basically, it just means if you're having to type long replies, and I'm really slow at typing on a phone, it just means that you can do so much faster. And also, if you get a text and you're on the sofa with your laptop and your phone is on the other side of the room, you don't have to get up. You can't say that is not a resource worth having. So really simple, but it's one of those little streamlining things that saves a bit of time, brings everything into one place as well, that I've found really useful.
Rob, can I challenge you on this one? Not challenge you, question you. Can you turn off the notifications? Because I could see this, like you're in a flow of something and then suddenly a text comes in and you stops your flow. Can you stop the texts coming in so when you're working you're not distracted? You can. Phew.
Yeah, I'm absolutely militant about notifications. I've got all notifications off. I've got my phone on silent most of the time. And it does mean I occasionally miss stuff. But I'd far rather occasionally not realise that somebody had tweeted me or something rather than constantly get distracted by things. So yeah, I'm totally on board with zero notifications.
Oh, that makes me feel better. So you're not just actually ignoring my messages.
No, I am ignoring you, but I've got a built-in excuse.
Okay, well, there's no excuse not to come back next week because, as you heard, we love doing this so much. So we are back, and we're back with a really interesting podcast. I say this every week, but it's interesting to us and hopefully others. And it's about UK property. I don't think that'll come as any surprise. But is it unaffordable? So you hear often in the media, properties well valued now, or it's completely overpriced now, it's unaffordable, it's affordable. There's so many conflicting views, and often it's used to suit people's agenda. You know, people want to make a story of something to show property is overpriced or underpriced or whatever it may be. So we're going to get to the bottom of it. Next week, we're going to get to the truth. We're not going to give opinions. We're going to look at the numbers, tell you what they are, and you can form your own opinions based off that.
Yep, it's going to be a geeky one, but a good one. So thank you very much for listening. Hope you'll join us next week for that as well. In the meantime, you can find all the links for everything we've talked about at the show notes, which are at thepropertyhub.net/byHMO. And also, don't forget to get along to a meetup next week, thepropertyhub.net/meetups, if you'd like to get along to one of those. But whatever you do, have a great week, and we'll see you back here next Thursday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.